Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be convening in about 1 minute. We now have a quorum present and some very important people in a hurry in our audience, not to mention the distinguished Chairman of Transportation is with us today. Really rather be at the raceway. I hadn't even got to you yet. Well, you got to get us some more water before we're all crazy about you anymore. So. I'm afraid you need a higher authority than this chair. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. We do have a quorum present, and with that knowledge, I'll call this meeting of the full Ways and Means Committee to order. This is a meeting that was originally scheduled for 2. We got rescheduled for at adjournment now. Is there anyone in the audience that is got to be in another committee or is pressed for time in the audience? You're in the audience. You two are. All right, Chairman Smith, which proposition do you have? It's a fairly quick one, I think, wasn't it? Chairman V. Smith. Yes, sir. Chair recognizes you to present House Bill 1035, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and I appreciate the subcommittee. This House Bill 1035 is extending the sunset. Greta and our transit systems in Georgia have been tax exempt from paying the first and second motor fuel tax, and that date runs out June the 30th of this year, 08. And we were asking the committee if you would be so kind to extend that sunset for 2 more years, 010.
Thank you for that, Chairman Smith, and I apologize. The chair does. I got a little ahead of myself. Chairman Scott, as the chair of the Public Finance and Policy Committee, what's your report on House Bill 1035, please, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After much strong-arming and negotiations from the Chairman of Transportation, the Public Finance and Policy Subcommittee of Ways and Means recommends do pass. The committee substitute to House Bill 1035 to the full Committee of Ways and Means.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, Chairman Vance Smith, do you want to just say ditto?
Yes, sir, ditto. It's a substitute to HB 1035. It was amended in subcommittee, and the date was made 2010 instead of 2011 to make it a 2-year term, as the chairman so eloquently stated. Everything else is on 2 years. So now I'll say ditto.
Okay. And I want to make sure we're working off of LC 187314S. Is that correct, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman?
sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Would you yield any questions from members of the committee?
I'd be glad to, Mr.
Any
Chairman.
member of the committee have any questions for Chairman Smith? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? We got a motion. Do I hear a second? Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion do pass, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Passes. We will not be able to get it to rules till tomorrow, though unfortunately we were unable to catch the House before it adjourned to ask them to keep it open, so it'll be in rules tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. It's always good to have you with us, too. We enjoyed that.
Yes, sir. Glad to be here.
All right. Chairman Lewis, which one do you have? House Bill 272, sales tax. Do we have a sales tax chair here? Anybody from sales tax? Would you, Chairman Martin, what number are you, please, sir? 12. You have a report for the full committee from the sales tax subcommittee.
Yes, sir. Your sales tax subcommittee met on HB 272 and moves it forward to the full committee with a do pass recommendation.
Chair recognizes Chairman Lewis to present House Bill 272, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the sales tax on energy used in manufacturing. Originally, this was the bill that would have phased out the state sales tax off of energy used for manufacturing, but we didn't get enough support right now for that. So what we do have in front of us is a cap on this, and the cap prices are listed in paragraph B of page 1, And it basically states that in the near future or the far future, that if energy prices exceed these prices here, anything over these prices listed will not be subject to the state sales tax when it's used for manufacturing. And that simply is all it does, Mr. Chairman.
I noticed just since the original fiscal note came back in, the spikes, especially in some of the fuel costs, have just been incredible. I don't know how consumers can continue to deal with it, especially our small businesses out there, with the just chaotic unpredictability. I certainly am glad the gentleman has brought this legislation. I hope folks across the hall see the merit of it as I'm sure we will. Is there any other questions for the chairman? I don't see any. What's the will of the committee?
Second.
I have a motion and a second by substitute of LC 18-7226S, House Bill 272. A motion and a second. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Proposition passes. Hopefully, Chairman Lewis will be in rules tomorrow. And you're excused. I know you have to be at another meeting, but we hope you'll be able to join us for the end of this one. Sales tax subcommittee member, do you have a subcommittee chairman? Sales tax on House Bill 948. Is there a report to the full committee?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, your sales tax subcommittee met on House Bill 948 and moves that forward to the full committee with a due pass recommendation.
The chair, with a great deal of pride, introduces probably the most expert on the environment in the whole state of Georgia, Chairman Lynn Smith. House Bill 948. Chairman Smith, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This proposition comes before this committee every year and our body, the General Assembly, because it also has a sunset provision. This is your sales tax holiday, and it is also your Energy Star holiday. This year the dates are July 31st, 2008 to August 3rd, 2008, and October the 2nd, 2008 until October the 5th, 2008. And I guess the fiscal note is in your package, but essentially, Mr. Chair, it just renews this for one more year.
One or two?
There are two dates. It's just one bill, but essentially your bill changes your dates. The body of the bill deals in August with your sales tax holiday for school. It's clothes, footwear, transactions of personal computers up to $1,500 with all peripheral devices, et cetera, et cetera. And then in October, it covers the Energy Star holiday, which covers things from dishwashers, clothes washers, air conditioners, ceiling fans, your correct type of light bulbs, dehumidifiers, programmable thermostats, and such as that. So it's I have received several requests to add more items to this list, but at this point in time, with respect to the difficulty of getting anything on this list, I've asked that it stay constant from last year, so there's no change as to what qualifies. And in 2007, at the state level, it was $11.98 million, $8.99 million local. 2008, it's $12.58 million state, $8.49 million local. So very little change in impact.
In your experience around your district and also around the whole state, do you feel like that the people of Georgia are getting the value that this legislation was designed to create for them? Do you feel good about that still? Yes,
I do. For parents of school-age children, it's almost a habit now. Before school starts, they know they're going to get this date. It helps our retailers. It helps the parents. It is also something that all of our border states do as well. Ours is pretty much more restrictive than the other areas, but it does satisfy that need. As to the Energy Star appliances, the first year we did it followed all the serious hurricanes we had, so it really brought to the forefront the need for energy-efficient products, but it also brought to the attention the fact that a lot of these products are also water-efficient. So since then, our state has looked upon as being wise before our time with that issue.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from members of the committee for Chairman Smith? Seeing none, what's the will of the committee? I've got a motion by Vice Chairman Sims to pass, a second by Chairman Mills. Any further discussion? See none. All in favor of the motion do pass on House Bill 948, which is LC 186761. Please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. As usual, Chairman Smith, as with most of your legislation, it passes unanimously. We thank you very much for your presentation.
Do you have a bill before my committee? I'm trying to understand the. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee.
I've just seen how you act when you're mad. I'm just kidding. Okay, is there anyone, any member of this legislature that has business with this community that's in the room that needs, for other reasons, to go fast? Okay, thank you for your patience, and we'll just try to call in order. I see out there Representative Knox. If you would come to the podium, sir, I'm going to ask for someone with the Income Tax Subcommittee. Is that you again, Chairman Martin, Income Tax? Knight. Chairman Knight, what number? Could you give us the full committee report on House Bill 9? What is it?
977, sir.
977. That's a Scribner's error on our agenda.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Your Income Tax Subcommittee met and moved a due pass on House Bill 977, LC 370575.
Chairman recognizes the distinguished chair of our Insurance Committee, Chairman Knox, to present to us House Bill 977, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here once again to present this bill to enhance the availability of insurance products, namely HSAs, to consumers in the state of Georgia. The scheme of the bill is to reduce premium taxes from the state paid by insurers who offer this kind of plan in order to encourage them to market the program more aggressively. It's a fairly low profit margin product, and so it may need some encouragement. It's also a product that's not well known to the public and that probably needs to be better marketed so that the public understands the benefit of having this kind of a policy and a plan for their health care. It's growing throughout the country. It's favored by the both federal and state authorities to help answer the problem of the lack of affordable health care in the state and in the country. And this provides for a forgiveness of only the state premium tax. It does not change the liability for county and city taxes. In addition to that, there is a income tax benefit for the purchaser in the bill, and the bill is endorsed by the Association of County Governments. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Are there? Would you will yield to questions? Number 11, is that Chairman Peake?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman Knox, could you just educate me a little bit real quick? On every health insurance premium now, there is this premium tax. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so this would be the only health insurance product in the state that would be exempt from that tax. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And the real purpose is to provide some incentive to move this, which is a very good product, but to move this product and make it more available more affordable to folks throughout the state.
Exactly, and of course you may be aware too that there's some sentiment to change the entire scheme for premium taxes in the state, particularly on health insurance in general, because it seems like it tends to weigh down the availability of health insurance products and the cost of them in general. So it would be in line with that.
Okay.
Thank you for the question.
26. Chairman Scott.
Thank you. Chairman Knox, currently employers receive the deduction for what they pay for their employees for health insurance. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And this is extending that same tax deduction to individuals who purchase health insurance.
That's
outside of employer plans.
That's correct.
And just so it is a dollar for dollar deduction. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
Is there a cap on the amount of the deduction?
I believe it is a dollar for dollar, but there's an adjustment that I can't explain to you. Y'all probably know better about it than I do between the federal and state taxes. So, however that works out, I think that's a flaw or a situation that we fixed the last time this came through the committee.
I'm not sure we can promulgate federal deductions. We can certainly promulgate state deductions, but from income tax.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If I may, I guess one question I have is if this is going to be, if I have no problem with individual policies receiving the same deduction as employer-based policies, but if we're only going to do it for high deductible health plans, what do we think will happen to the other plans in the market?
If it was up to me, they'd get the same treatment. We're in a situation where we're constantly trying to find government solutions to providing health care, and yet we're in the process or in the business of collecting, not allowing these tax deductions to some individuals who really need the product, and we do it and we allow it to others who have the product provided through their employer. So it seems to me we ought to be able to provide the same benefit to an individual just because they don't have a big-time employer.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions for the chairman. I do, excuse me. 27, Representative Flood.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Knox, is there a definition somewhere of high deductible health plan? What makes the plan high?
There is a definition in the law. It's not in this bill because health savings accounts and high deductible health plans are already available in the law, and the purpose of this bill is not to make those available. They already are there. I guess the best, my best definition would be high deductible means that it's more than $100 or $200, which has been typical for years that your deductible on a policy would be. High deductible means that I have a certain amount of health care expense that I have to be responsible for myself between the health savings account and the what I call the catastrophic policy that's covering catastrophic conditions, if you will.
Okay. I was just trying to make sure I understood, as with Chairman Scott, the rationale for high deductible plans and not perhaps for all plans, and what constituted a high deductible, and that would be somewhat of a relative term because what might be high to someone may not necessarily be high to someone else.
Well, as I say, that's I guess it's a term of art, but it's a term it is defined in the code and is permitted in federal law. That's how we can do it here in this state. It had to be permitted by federal law that you could offer these kinds of plans in order for us to even be able to be having this conversation, because it's a specific kind of a health care arrangement plan where the insured or the individual takes more responsibility for the actual cash cost of the treatments that they're getting with these kind of plans than they do in a typical, health insurance plan where you have, the doctors have got a $10 deductible that you have to pay yourself. We're talking about, a choice that you'd make, $1,000, $2,000, up to $5,000 deductible that you could have that you'd be responsible for yourself before your health insurance plan takes over.
Thank you.
Notice you moved to the right, too, today, Representative Flood. Glad to have you. Chairman Scott, another question?
We've surrounded him, Mr. Chairman.
We're happy to have him wherever he sits.
I guess I'd like, if you would, to see the actual definition of a high deductible health plan. I believe it's got a minimum deductible of $1,150 or $1,200, right there in that range. No doctor's copays, no pharmacy benefit copays, and the individual's got an out-of-pocket, not of the 100 or 200 or even 500, but it's, I believe the minimum's $1,150. Do you know what that?
I wouldn't argue with you, but my
deductible is?
I wouldn't argue with it. I think that's correct. But my point is, this doesn't change that. It doesn't invent that. That's already in the law. This is strictly about providing tax incentives for the marketing and sale of the product.
And it's typically used in conjunction with a health savings plan.
That's correct.
To deal with the out-of-pocket that he's concerned about, I think.
That's correct.
That's good vetting, though, and those are great questions. And I know he knows of what he speaks because he is a professional in this area.
He is that.
Any other questions? I don't see any. So what is the will of the committee? We're actually talking about House Bill 977, which is really LC 370575. Now, that's not a number you're going to see in your packet. I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. We will submit this to the Rules Committee tomorrow because we closed the House today. Sir.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Members of the committee, thank you very much.
Okay. Income Tax Subcommittee Chair. Chairman Knight. Do you have a report for the full committee of House Bill 1100, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Your Income Tax Subcommittee met on House Bill 1100 and recommended a due pass by committee substitute, LC 187295S.
I'm not only excited about the potential of this legislation, but as excited and humbled to introduce its co-author, Chairman Parrish. Tell us about House Bill 1100, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to come share this with you and your committee. House Bill 1100 really comes to us from work of our Georgia Film Commission. I think everybody realized that Georgia was not competitive in the film industry right now as far as doing the productions here, and they were charged with thinking out of the box. What could we do to make Georgia competitive that at the same time was good business sense? So simply what they did is they came up with a two-part approach. One, it would offer a 20% tax credit for qualified productions, and then they had the opportunity to earn an additional 10% by doing certain things that promoted the state. And it also simplified this by removing the tiers that we had previously in this legislation with the credits about the different counties and the tiers. So it's really a very simple proposition. It's easy to understand. It applies statewide. And I think this is something that we can all be proud of and will generate a lot of economic impact in this state. I'd be glad to answer any questions if you have any, Mr. Chairman.
Members of the committee have any questions for the author of this? Does everybody remember Forrest Gump and sitting on the park bench in Savannah and the residual value of that? I don't know why. Every time I look at Vice Chairman Sims, I always think of that.
Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get, do you?
I almost feel like we ought to ask you some questions to make you go to all the trouble to come over here, but we're all pretty excited about this and very glad that you did it. I don't see any questions, and I'm ready to hear what the will of this committee is. Got a motion and a second, and two budding new stars in film, I noticed. In case there are any producers out there, that was Chairman Rice and Mr. Chairman Stanley over there. I'm sure there are parts available for them pretty soon. I have a motion do pass. Any further discussion? I don't see any. All in favor of the motion do pass, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. It carries unanimously, and it'll be in rules in the morning. And Chairman Parrish, thank you for that presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me encourage you and the members of the committee to keep your cell phones handy, because I'm sure you'll be expecting a casting call any day now.
Any day.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's see, we got Mumford, okay, and that's Chairman Scott. Do you have a report for the full committee on House Bill 302, please, sir?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Your Public Finance and Policy Subcommittee met on House Bill 302 and recommends do pass by committee substitute to the full Committee of Ways and Means.
Chair recognizes Representative Mumford. If you would, please, sir, tell us about your House Bill 302, please, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate being here today. We have brought a substitute from last year's bill. This is a bill that would raise the hotel-motel tax within the city of Conyers 2 cents. It has been redrawn so that it creates an entirely new section, so there is absolutely no concern as far as the law can be understood that this applies only to the city of Conyers. I've passed out a document which reflects the current sales tax in Conyers and also the current hotel-motel tax rate of 6%. I hope all of you got a copy of that. Rockdale County currently has a sales tax rate of 7% and a hotel-motel tax rate of 6%. This bill would raise that tax rate by 2 cents, the hotel-motel tax, that is. And it would be those funds would be applied to the Georgia International Horse Park. Those of you that don't know about the horse park, it has been there since the Olympic Games, and it is in competition with large horse venues all across the southeast and really nationally. I believe it is the largest venue in the state for horse shows. It is the largest economic engine for Rockdale County. I had a question in subcommittee about the revenue stream that this is producing, and I unfortunately don't have that figure, but it's not a very large figure. We're talking about, I think, between 6 and 9 properties total that are affected by this, and the owners of those, I am told by the City of Conyers, are in support of this legislation. It has the full support of the mayor and council of the City of Conyers. Also, I want to point out that our horse park has had we receive no state funds of any kind, and it has been funded with essentially every mechanism that is available to find funds. Public-private partnerships, sale of some of the property. Believe it or not, there's actually a TAD in the area that is helping to fund it. There's every possible feature has been exhausted, and we would really appreciate having this extra 2 cents so that we could continue to expand the barns and continue to expand the area, the facility as a tourist attraction. This particular facility draws people from all over the country, and it also, because we have so few hotels and motels in Conyers, it's drawing business to Madison, DeKalb County, other places. It really is producing a lot of interest. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
29, is that Chairman Rice?
Thank you, Representative Mumford, for bringing the bill. I've been out there. It's a beautiful spot. The only question I had was, this is ostensibly for developing, constructing, operating, and so on. So I guess the question I really have is, have you examined the possibility of sunsetting this tax, since it appears that some of these expenditures would be things that would be current expenditures as opposed to something that would be ongoing?
We have thought about that, especially in regard to Mr. Stevens' bill that he has regarding the hotel-motel tax statewide, and it's quite possible that next year we would be coming back for some adjustment. I can tell you that while I really can't speak for the mayor and council, I suppose, there, in my view, there are an enormous amount of capital projects out there that these funds can. We have quite a list that could go on for some time. So I'm not sure that it would be used up at any time in the near future.
Thank you.
Chairman Sims?
As an addendum to this, you are planning to name one of those horses after our chairman here, Lightning Larry. Is that correct?
I think that it would be more appropriate, and I'm actually gonna look into this. I at least want to get one of the stalls with his name there in the stall, name a stall after him at least. I think that's the least we could do if we can get a due pass out of this committee.
Could you please put it on the front of the stall?
Well, we want it where the equestrian or the equine can read it.
With that, can you whinny for us, and we'll try to go on from there.
I don't think that'd be appropriate today, although I'll do it right after the meeting for you.
I certainly don't see any other questions of a serious note on my indicator up here. With that said, what's the will of the committee? I've got a motion due pass and a second over here on House Bill 302. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion due pass, House Bill 302, that's LC 149812S, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. It carries unanimously.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. While we're in that section, if you don't mind, Chairman Sims, I'm going to relinquish the chair to you, and if we could find out if we've got a report on House Bill 1168, which would come out of our which committee? Public Finance from Chairman Scott.
Chairman Scott, do you have a report from Public Finance? What number?
Yeah. House Bill 1168, Public Finance Policy Subcommittee recommends due pass to the full Ways and Means Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this is Representative O'Neill's bill. If you will, please address us with 1168.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, 1168 is in the exact same area and actually some of the same language of the bill we just considered for Conyers. There's a big difference. This proposition has nothing to do with raising the taxes at all. This is antecedent only to the city of Perry, and this has come to me as a request from the great city of Perry, Georgia, where and it has to do with the distribution of the funds as they are collected by the hotels and motels there. There used to be a requirement, and still is, frankly, under the law, that a percentage of the CVB or Convention and Visitors Bureau sharing in this funds, which is supposed to go, the mission of that obviously is to attract tourism to an area. It's supposed to go into the things that would attract tourism, was also further apportioned for only capital improvements. The folks in Perry tell me that there's no other buildings or anything they can build that will be as important to them as a continued advertising campaign, and they're very fortunate to have the Georgia Agri Center there and now Go Fish Georgia. So they really have plenty of capital improvements. They just got to get the word out now that they have them and where they are. So they've asked me to remove the restriction of the capital improvement component of what in effect is 16 2/3% of the money they collect, and that's what this bill does.
Any questions of members of the committee to the chairman? With no other questions, do I hear a motion? We have a motion to pass. Do I have a second? I also have a second. What's the will of the committee by vote of you? I need it. All in favor say aye. All opposed? I think we're moving you to rules, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Sims. That was scintillating how you
I
handled that.
understand that. I think I turned it off.
Now you've turned the whole system off, too. Are we on VCR now? Okay.
Yeah. That was a good picture of you there, Mr. Chairman. Look real good.
I'm going to have to get you to help again later, so maybe you could work on that. And I'll come
I'm having to reach across you in all your paperwork. I'm having trouble.
I understand. You know, there are people watching us on the internet. They got to have nothing else to do that way. Chairman Martin, well, first of all, from our Chairman Scott, do you have a report for the full committee on House Bill 1024, please, sir?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, your Public Finance Policy Subcommittee recommends do pass by committee substitute on House Bill 1024 to the full Committee of Ways and Means.
I've got you turned on. I'm just wondering, are you 2.7 or 2.6? I'm sorry.
Actually, I'm only 19. 26.
Well, I've got you lit up, and we still can't hear you good. I'm sorry. We got to. There we go. Okay. All right. So we have a do pass on House Bill 1024. The chair recognizes our subcommittee chairman. Martin. I'm trying to think of your number. I'm sorry. I knew your name. I'm trying to think of your number. What is it? 11? 12. I'm sorry, sir. If you would present to this committee House Bill 1024, Chairman Martin.
If you forgot my name, Mr. Chairman, that means I hadn't caused any trouble this year.
No, well, that's
So
not. You never have.
Yes, sir. I bring this with the chair's permission for Chairman Roger Williams, who is chairing his committee at this time. This is quite a simple proposition. There exists a tax for that a municipality or county could have put in place. I think going back, it's called the minimum or maximum recreation tax, and this goes back to the 50s in Georgia. And when this was passed and put forth on the folks as an ad valorem tax, there wasn't a method for repealing that. And there are those. In fact, there is a municipality in Chairman Williams' district that has one of these, no longer needs it. So what this legislation simply does is allow the local governing body to call by referendum a vote of the people, shall this tax be removed. And we would respectfully ask the committee's consideration to move this on to rules so that tax burden could be removed from the folks in Georgia where that is no longer needed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that presentation. Any questions for the surrogate author of that legislation? I don't see any. What's the will of the committee? I have a motion, do pass, and a second. We're talking about House Bill 1024 from LC 187218S. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion do pass, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. It carries unanimously. And Chairman Williams ought to be eternally grateful, and he is on the beverage committee. You know that, yes, so you can do it right. We have 3 propositions left, and 2 of them I think are extremely important, and I've kind of saved those for near the last. And all kidding aside, I think this is some long overdue and much needed legislation. So do we have a report from the ad valorem tax subcommittee, Chairman Royal, on or if you'll do the report, okay, Chairman Sims, on House Resolution 1276.
Mr. Chairman, your committee on ad valorem has moved that House Resolution 1276 come to full committee.
Do pass.
Do pass.
Okay. And while we've got you, how about House Bill 1211?
Also, the committee on ad valorem also brings House Bill 1211 with a do pass recommendation.
And Chairman recognizes Chairman Royal to tell us about either of those that he wishes to take first. Chairman Royal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll take House Resolution 1276 first. It's LC 187312S. Mr. Chairman, would you give me some idea of how much detail you want in this? I can go page by page or whatever you desire.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think this is very, very important legislation, and I think that this committee is vested with the opportunity, but also the obligation to make sure that that we know exactly what this body's doing and proposing. So, with that being said, I would like for you to be as detailed as you think tells the full story, because it's very comprehensive legislation, I think, to deal with an industry that is significantly in jeopardy today in our state. So
I'll be glad to do that. First of all, let me tell you why this legislation is necessary. First of all, our timber industry economically is in dire straits because of prices of timber. Secondly, it's been affected very adversely because of the ad valorem taxes that have escalated in the past 3 years especially. We've seen forest land over the last 3 years increase in value by 59%. I guess the third consideration is the consequences to our environment if we lose all of this timberland, which has been sold off by the large timber companies at a rapid rate, so that our clean air, our clean water is affected by that. So for many years, I personally resisted offering this type of relief. But with the way they have been treated, the timber industry has been treated in ad valorem tax, I think it's time that they deserve some relief. So that's why we have introduced this. We'll start with the House Resolution 1276. On page 1, line 16, that creates a separate class of property for ad valorem tax purposes. On line 22, defines a qualified owner as an individual, individuals, or entity registered to do business in the state of Georgia. On line 24, it requires the property owner to enter into a covenant. On page 2C, this says that all contiguous farmland, and this is a key line here on line 2, it says, for which forest land conservation use assessment is sought. This means all the forest land that an owner wants to apply for a covenant may enter that within a county, but it has to be contiguous in one covenant, one single covenant. Now, if they desire to have a tract of land not to enter the covenant, then they don't have to do that. On line 4D, the covenant period is for 15 years, and if they breach the covenant, there's some severe penalties attached. Starting on line 7, provides for partial sales, and that if if there's a tract sold which requires a tract less than 200 acres, it can be continued in the covenant until the expiration of the covenant. No new covenant can be re-entered if it's not a 200-acre tract. On line 16, none of these conservation use properties can be simultaneously enrolled in preferential tax treatment or in Cougar conservation use. Starting on line 19, this defines the amount of the adjustment that an owner will receive would be the difference between the forest land conservation use value of such property and the forest land fair market value, which is going to be defined on the next page. On line 24, it deals with the reimbursement. The digest, total tax digest, is reduced in the county by 3% or more. The county will be the city, the independent school systems, and the county school systems will be reimbursed at 100% of their loss. If the total tax digest is reduced by 3% or less due to the implementation of this, then they will be reimbursed at an amount of 50% of the difference in the tax savings. On page 3, it makes sure that the standing timber is not part of this legislation, and it wasn't in Cuba either. On line 4, number 6, it's the definition of forest land fair market value, which means the 2008 fair market value of forest land. And it also provides that the 2008 valuation may increase from one taxable year to the next at a rate to the percentage change in the price index for gross output of state and local government from prior year to the current year as defined by the National Income and Products Account. This is to prevent those taxing jurisdictions from increasing the values on the fair market value, thus increasing the amount of reimbursement they get because they know that the state's going to pay for the difference. On line 11, it says the General Assembly shall appropriate these amounts, so it's not permissive by the legislature. The legislature shall appropriate these funds. That pretty well defines the constitutional amendment. I'll be glad to respond to questions on that, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any questions for Chairman Royal and so far? Okay. Would you prefer to, since the other is enabling legislation, would you prefer to take that up before we move on either of the two propositions?
It makes no difference to me either way you want to handle it.
I think probably the committee might be more informed if they had the entirety of the proposition before them. So if you don't mind, Chairman Royal, if you would go ahead now with House Bill 1211, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
LC 187313S. It should still be warm. On page 1, it defines forest land conservation value of forest land conservation use property. And on line 18, it defines again the forest land fair market value, which I just read to you in the constitutional amendments. On page 2, on line 4 and 5 is the name of the act, the Georgia Forest Land Protection Act of 2008. On line 7, the forest land property. Okay, let's see. Okay, it's the qualifying restrictions on starting on line 7 and going on down. I'll cause you to note on line 12 that it excludes any residence located on the property, so that's not part of the conservation use savings. On line 31, there are additional rules that apply for qualification. There again, it also calls for all contiguous land of a county to be in a single covenant. Has a provision on line 36 when half or more of the area is used for a qualifying purpose, then provided there's no other type of business being operated on it, the whole portion would be eligible. Some of the things that we've recognized in CUVA that originally caused some breaches is starting on line 4, page 3 is hunting rights or the use of the property for hunting purposes shall not constitute another type of business. The charging of admission for the property or for fishing purposes or the production of pine straw shall not constitute another type of business, thus causing a breach of the covenant. On line 8, soil maps were used in the original. A lot of this language came right out of the CUVA, or the Conservation Use Covenants. Required soil maps to start with. Now the Board of Tax Assessors shall use the current soil classifications and not require all these landowners to come up with a new soil survey. Line 13 again requires a covenant for 15 years. They may renew that covenant after the 15 years, or they may renew that covenant on line 28 after 14 years. On line 30, a property owner may enter into more than one covenant and cross county lines to do so. It still has to be contiguous if it's in one county and if they want to seek this treatment. Line 34 again that was mentioned in the conservation in the constitutional amendment is you cannot be part of CUVA or preferential treatment and be in this covenant also. It does allow a one-time change from preferential or conservation use covenant into this covenant. And let's see. Called your attention to line 7 and 8 on page 4 is this property must be continuously devoted to forest land conservation use during the entire period of the covenant. Starting on page 12, it also mentions again that if there's part of the property acquired by someone else and it's 200 acres, less than 200 acres, the covenant may be continued but not re-entered if it's less than 200 acres from the original covenant. Line 20 tells the time of the filing for the covenant. On lines 32, 33, 34 requires indexing of the properties owned by the clerk. so that these properties are identified and no one can acquire a piece of property without knowing that it is part of a covenant and the covenant be breached because they bought it. On page 5, line 12, the Commissioner of the Department of Revenue will provide uniform application of the covenant forms. And this was concerned this issue was addressed in the subcommittee this morning, where an alleged breach of the covenant is issued by the tax assessors, starting on line 14. In the case of an alleged breach of the covenant, the qualified owner shall be notified in writing by the Board of Tax Assessors. The qualified owner shall have a period of 30 days from the date of such notice to either cease or desist the activity alleged in the notice to be in the breach of the covenant, or to remediate or correct the conditions or conditions alleged in the notice of the breach of the covenant. Following a physical inspection of the property, the Board of Tax Assessors shall notify the qualified owner that such activity or activities have or have not properly ceased, or that the conditions have or have not been remediated or corrected. This triggers an appeal. It is the same appeal that we have in all the property tax appeals. Line 25 starts talking about the penalties. On lines 29, 30 through 33, if the covenant is breached during the first 5 years of the covenant, the penalty would be the difference between the assessed value and the fair market value times 3. It's a very severe penalty for the total tract that's under the covenant and for each year that the covenant has been in effect, or each partial year. On lines 34, 36, and on the next page, if the covenant is breached during the years 6 through 10, the penalty shall be for each year from starting with year 1 to 10, 2.5 times. So we're not going to say that we're going to have a 3 times penalty for the first 5 years and a 2.5 for the second 5 years. It all goes back to year 1, and the penalty is applied to that. On the next page 6, C, if it's breached during 11 through 15, the covenant shall be 2 times, which is the same penalty for conservation use, and it will be from years 1 through 15 applied that way. On line 8, any penalty shall bear interest as specified in 48-240. Okay, on lines 10 through 14, if there's a breach and the penalties are collected by the counties, the school boards, the original amount paid to those counties shall be reimbursed to the Department of Revenue, or shall be go in the general fund. The counties, the cities, and the school board would keep the penalties and the interest. Line 15, these penalties and interest constitute a lien as they do in property taxes. On line 22, the penalties do not apply if the covenant's breached solely as acquisition of part of the property on an eminent domain, the sale of any of this property to anyone who had the authority under the power of eminent domain, the death of an owner, and the following shall not constitute a breach: mineral exploration, allowing the land on line 32 to lie fallow or idle for any purposes of forestry conservation or purposes of federal agricultural assistance program, or for other agricultural management purposes. Number 3, for the land to lie idle or fallow during a period of economic hardship for any 2 years of any 5-year period of an owner. It also allows property which is subject to a covenant for forest land conservation on page 7 to be transferred to a place of religious worship no more than 25 acres. If it's not used for the purpose that that entity is entitled to under the code section, then it will constitute a breach. We also have a provision in there which was a problem under Cuba, and that cell phones were considered leasing 6 acres of land for cell phone use was considered a breaching the covenant under Cuba. We changed that. Now we said that we can have 6 acres for every 2,000 acres placed in the covenant that would be eligible for cell phone transmission towers. Starting on line 20, there are lesser penalties, which means the penalty is the only penalty is the difference between what they should have paid and what they saved without the multiplier in there. It would also be subject to interest. But and some of those cases would be foreclosure on the land as long as it was not a friendly foreclosure, medically demonstrable illness or disability, which had to be clearly demonstrated by medical profession. Another reason would be is breached solely as a qualified owner who has already gone through a 15-year covenant. He has re-entered a second 15-year covenant. He's aged 65 years and older. He has served at least 3 years in that covenant. He would be allowed to breach the covenant and pay only the penalty without the multiplier in there. Another case would be if it was breached solely by a qualified owner who had reached the age 67. He had owned the property for at least 15 years or had inherited the property and had it maintained for at least 3 years under the covenant. It would be the penalty for the time of the 3 years without the multiplier. On line 17, the property shall be classified from all other property tax on the digest, so it could be readily available to anybody that wanted to see what properties were in this. It would be also maintained on line 25 in a central registry and index so that anyone could go to the courthouse and see, and to make sure that the 200-acre minimum requirement was applied with. Line 28, the commissioner shall annually submit a report to all of the people shown there. This report on line 35 shall include the amount of the assessed values eliminated from each county's digest as a result of such assessments, the approximate tax dollar losses by county to all local governments affected, and all of that information. On page 9, line 5, a public notice of this statute should be in the courthouse where everybody could view the statute. On page 9, if there's a covenant that has been completed at the end of the lease, then the owner is required to file application for a lease from the conservation use covenant, as long as it no longer is qualified for that type of treatment, and then the clerk knows to take it off the index. Again, on line 21, the commissioner shall have the power, that's the commissioner of the Department of Revenue, to publish reasonable rules. That's again on line 31 and 32. Line 35. This is important. In the event that the forest land conservation use value for any forest land conservation use property in the tables, these tables are established by the Department of Revenue, and they're currently being established right now for Cuba purposes. They'll use the same values, but they cannot increase more than 3% per year for the forest land conservation use, so they cannot go up over 3% a year. Starting on line 10, this is the same language in the Homestead Act that we now currently reimburse counties. We brought this forward, except for on line 31, it defines eligible assessed value. On the next page 11, line 6, it defines forest land conservation use property. And line 9, forest land conservation use value. And again, it defines forest land fair market value, and that goes back to the 2008 value. On line 28, each year the General Assembly shall appropriate funds for the land conservation use. All of this language was copied from the Homestead Act, where we reimbursed counties and cities for their lost ad valorem tax. On page 13, line 15, each fiscal authorities shall show the credit amount on the tax bill together with a permanent notice in substantially the following form. This reduction in your tax bill is a result of the Forest Land Conservation Use Property Tax Relief enacted by the Governor and the General Assembly. They have to give the amount of it so that the legislature and the Governor are given credit for this tax relief. Again, on line 22, the amount of the reimbursement, again, where it's if the digest of the county, city, or municipality is more than 3%, it would be 100% reimbursed. If it's less than 3%, it would be half of it reimbursed. On the line 14, on page 14, line 7, any excess funds must be returned to the Department of Revenue and go back in the general fund. Fiscal note on this, I had the fiscal note done. It took some 3 to 4 weeks to get that done by the School of Forestry at the University of Georgia. They had to make some assumptions like what percentage of the land available would be entered into these covenants. Some counties were 50%, some were 80%, some were 10%. They came up with a total revenue loss based on their assumptions of $54,700,000. The reimbursements that are provided for in this legislation account for $39,700,000. I would appreciate your favorable consideration, and I'll be glad to try to respond to any questions.
Are there any questions?
I appreciate that.
We kind of have one. This may be more for legislative council than you, Mr. Chairman, but I'll fire it at you because you may actually know as well. But my lawyer over here to my left and I are a little confused about. It seems like I guess my question is, could you trace the flow of money? Essentially, what's happening here is the tax reduction is being funded by the state rather than the local governments taking a haircut, so to speak, with the exception of half of a 3% very small threshold. But I guess I'm confused with the language on the top of page 12 said, and each year the General Assembly shall appropriate to the Department of Revenue funds to provide forest land conservation use tax relief grants, and then it says to taxpayers, counties, municipalities, and county or independent school districts. I understand the appropriation to counties, municipalities, independent school districts, but why would we appropriate funds to taxpayers if we're just handling this essentially as a grant? Why is the word taxpayers in that language? I guess is my question. That's the top of page 12.
I think I should refer that to Legislative Council. I think this is the same language.
That was an attempt to distinguish between the two types of grants that are being made. One is going to the taxpayer but not really being reflected on the tax bill of the taxpayer. One grant. And the second grant is reimbursed going back directly to the county, depending on whether it's a 3% or more or 3% less hit.
All right. Well, I'm really confused. Could you tell me about the two separate grants? And I thought it was only one grant from the state, so I'm real confused. Can you say again what two grants we're talking about?
Yes, sir. It's my understanding through this that there are two series of grants. One is a grant that will be reflected on the tax bill of the taxpayer, similar to the way a homeowner tax relief grant is structured now. The second grant will actually be a direct grant to the cities or counties to hold them harmless when it's complete. Depending on, again, if you get 100% there, if the digest hit more than 3%, only 50% reimbursement if it's less than.
But even with the homestead tax relief grant, we don't ever really send any funds or appropriate any funds to the taxpayer. We do it for the benefit of the taxpayer. But I guess I'm having from the appropriation standpoint, I know we have to cover both grants and both eventualities, but I guess what's confusing to me is why we're using the term taxpayer when all of the funding goes to the counties or the cities or the school boards or the school organizations, but yet we have the word taxpayers in there that to appropriate tax relief grants to taxpayers. But I guess our intent here, though, Mr. Chairman, the author of this, is that it will work like the homestead tax relief grants do now.
That's correct, and I would suggest that we remove the word taxpayers,
or maybe put to grant for the benefit of taxpayers rather than to taxpayers. Maybe would be. I hate to sound like a lawyer on you. On page 12, after you got through everything that was here, I didn't notice that earlier in subcommittee. But any other? You got any other questions? Do you have a question, Representative Scott?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move due pass at the earliest opportunity.
Okay. I understand, and I know the hour is getting late, and I share a little bit of your frustration, but I also want to make sure we got this right. And I guess if we need to, after further legal consultation, we can always do a rule substitute if we had to at that point in time rather than trying to amend here. I think the concept's probably clear to the committee. I hope it is because I don't see any other questions from anybody. So if you don't mind, I will, if there are no further questions, I will ask the committee what its desires are as it relates to or in connection with House Resolution 1276, which is from LC 187312S. I have a motion and a second. I see any further discussion. Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. House Resolution 1276 will pass on to the Rules Committee. And now the enabling, which will take 2/3 vote of the General Assembly, since it's a constitutional amendment as I understand it. House Bill 1211. What is the pleasure of the committee? I have a motion and a second. House Bill 1211 from LC 187313S. All in favor of that proposition, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Carries unanimously. Thank you, Chairman Royal, for that very detailed and comprehensive presentation. All right, I'm going to vacate the chair one more time. House Bill 447 from the Income Tax Subcommittee, which will be you, Knight, Chairman Knight.
Okay. Do we have a report from the Income Tax Committee on House Bill 447?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Your Income Tax Subcommittee met and on Bill 447 and recommended a due pass by committee substitute, LC 187293S.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman O'Neill, will you present House Bill 447 at this time?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I bring before the committee House Bill 447, which I would characterize, not even in a humorous sort of way, as probably the most technical legislation I've ever been involved with. But it is the purpose of which very generally is to correct a gigantic loophole that exists currently in our state tax code to where we have circumstances to where folks that can come to Georgia actually own and control two entities with very common ownership, or certainly common control features, and do business in this state, occupy and enjoy all the fruits and benefits of the real estate while they do business, yet somehow by tax lawyer miracle transfer by dividends and other income streams which are germane pretty much only to these things called REITs, or real estate investment trust, to states that treat the income or this dividend income in a more favorable way than Georgia would have. So in other words, you can artificially set lease-back arrangements with what we call captive REITs, and then have the income wind up being attributable to shareholders of the REITs by dividends in states that don't tax dividends, like the state of Nevada that don't have corporation taxes. This was not my brand new idea or some epiphany I had in the shower one day. I actually began to study this concept in a lot of the national seminars that I've been going to as fiscal chair for Georgia, and saw where other states, the most prominent one I remember was the state of North Carolina, made a correction to this. I would point to the committee the fiscal note where Georgia is losing at least $25.2 million by what I would have to characterize as tax lawyer trickery by using these captive REITs. And yet we have businesses that, and we certainly all want to do everything we can to promote economic development and business in this state, but we have businesses that are enjoying our great markets, our great outstanding employees in Georgia and staffing and so forth, and essentially not sharing the burden of this infrastructure that we all have to deal with. So that's in general what this very technical legislation is about. It's certainly modeled after what North Carolina did about this 2 years ago, and I would also tell you that since they made their changes in their state code to sort of close this loophole, it has since been subject to appellate court scrutiny, and the language that you see in this legislation has held up fine under even the court scrutiny thereafter. And their testimony that I heard at all these national conventions in North Carolina is that their legislation has been very, very successful. We're not trying to run anybody off. We're not trying to treat anybody unfairly. But we also are not going to be taken advantage of in this state, and that's what this legislation is all about, and I'd be happy to yield any questions.
Do we have any questions for the chairman? Any members of the committee? Does anyone wish to make a motion? We have a motion and a second. All in favor of the bill state by saying aye. Aye. All opposed. This will be moved on to the Rules Committee this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know everybody would just love to stay here for another couple, 3 hours. But if there's anybody left awake on the committee, would you like to bring any further business before the committee? I think we've dealt with everything on our agenda. Is that right, Madam Secretary? We have. I don't see anybody with any further business to our committee. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for your work ethic. We stand adjourned.